back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this very simple end grain chopping board using some scrap cherry and some scrap maple that I had lying around. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Never done an end grain chopping board, but I think you can admit it looks pretty cool. Nice pattern, kind of like a chessboard, and I've already used it a couple of times making some butternut squash pasta, so I'm really happy with how it's turned out, and it's great fun to use. So let's get going with the video. The first step to this project was to cut out all of the square pieces. Now I was just using some 32mm squared cherry and maple that I had left over. Now you could of course do this by hand, but it would take a lot longer and probably wouldn't be as accurate. Now I was using a DW701 miter saw here, and this is a really nice tool to use. I could do with a new blade on it ideally, as the blade does leave quite a lot of tear out as it's quite a sort of heavy duty blade, but I can easily change out the blade for something like a 40-tooth blade, which will result in a much smoother cut. So the next step is to start gluing all of these together. Now I've just gone for an alternating pattern, so we're going to stick some Gorilla Glue beside each of these and then glue it all up. I then glued the pieces together using Gorilla Glue. Now in hindsight it would have been way better to glue these up as one huge block with all the spindles and then cut them afterwards into these sort of sections, as it would mean it would be way more accurate and wouldn't have as much deviation in the height of the piece. So I've just taken these parts out of the clamps. Now I've had them in the clamps for about an hour or so. They're all nice and glued up. I did put a hell of a lot of glue on them, but I don't think it's a big deal. They have probably triple the amount of glue they need, but I'd rather they're glued up nicely than not. Now at the moment, if you look, there are some gaps between them, but that's fine because we're going to be either sanding this or we might plane it. I haven't decided yet, but I'm going to get these nice and flat so that we can glue these together. Now at the moment you can see all the tops aren't perfectly flat. Now the reason for that is unfortunately I should have used a smaller stop block, and I'll show you why. Now whilst this stop block works fine if it's at the other end where there's an even clamping face, here I was trying to clamp to that tiny piece. So what I should have done is use a big block of wood, and I could have clamped across this whole surface, put the stop of it up against here, and it would have been much more accurate. So now it just means I have a lot more sanding to get this all nice and flat, but I'm not too fussed by that. I then used my Bauer random orbit sander to start to flatten the tops of these slightly. Now as I said, they weren't particularly flat, so there was quite a lot of sanding involved in this process, but I did use a belt sander which helped with this process. However, ideally if you made them all the same size, you wouldn't have half as much sanding to do, and this process would go way quicker. So what I've done here is sand these faces so that when I put them together, there's no gap. That gap that you can see there is just where the pieces are not perfectly flat yet. And I had to cut these two again because I messed them up trying to cut this on the bandsaw, each piece just to make it flat, which didn't really work. So I've just cut two new pieces. This is the only piece of this I have left, so no pressure. And it's also got this notch out of it, so I'm just going to have to do the best I can with it. I then glued the bigger blocks together. Now there was 4 or 5 of these, so I just put glue onto each of them, then spread it about, and I also had to glue in those 2 extra pieces that I made to compensate for where I messed up the bandsaw cut. I then used some Axminster clamps, some F-clamps and some weights just to keep it all nice and flat. The next step to this project was lots of sanding, and I mean lots of sanding. This took hours, to be honest. I mean, it would have been way easier if I'd just done it right in the first place, but you learn how to do things and you learn from your mistakes. But with a combination of the belt sander and the random orbit sander, it probably took me a few hours to get it all nice and flat. So I've now finished sanding the board up, so we're now going to move on to applying some food safe oil. Now I'm going to use Chestnut Products Food Safe Finish. I'm going to apply a top coat to this, let it soak, do the sides, flip it over, and we'll try and get 2 or 3 coats on this. So I'm going to be using Chestnut Products Food Safe Finish. Now I'm probably just going to use kitchen roll to do the first coat. That'll probably be enough for a first coat. I think it's going to look pretty cool. Try and keep my hands out of the shot as much as possible. Oh, missed a bit of glue there. Have to go back and sand that a little bit. The other good thing about this oil, it does at least show where you've missed a bit of glue. That top corner there. I might be able to quickly do it with the oil here actually. Let's do the sides. Now the sides aren't particularly great. I have made a couple of errors with it. It's not particularly even on the sides, but it doesn't really matter. It's a functional item at the end of the day. So I've given this about half an hour to dry. It feels fairly dry, so I reckon we're going to do the other coats. Now, I've cut up these oak strips, well, they were cut up before, and I've put a bit of oil on them and sanded them so they're not rough, and so they don't absorb oil from this. So now I'm going to put a coat of oil onto this side. Now this is the side that I won't be chopping on as much. It's the other side that I particularly care about. I do think I've missed quite a few glue spots on this, but we will see. And this side I also know isn't particularly flat. And neither of these sticks, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be quite a lot of bits that I've got to come back and touch up on this side, but we'll see. So there's a couple already. Okay, so it's not half as many as I thought. It's quite good though that you can clearly see where they are. So there's one there, a couple up there. I then used some sandpaper and some oil just to remove any of the glue lines that were still visible on the chopping board. Now what I should have done is used 120 grit, then go up through the grits, but I didn't really do that, so it did leave it with some very small scratches. However, over time, as the chopping board gets used, it's going to end up with loads of little scratches, so it didn't really bother me. So I'm now ready to put on, I think, the second or third coat of oil. I have got a light on, so the brightness might look a bit weird, but it's rather dark in here at the moment in this corner, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So I'll put a bit of oil on it. I'm running quite low on this oil, so I should have enough to finish this though. So I'll just let that soak around for a bit. Now yeah, I think this is the third coat of oil, so after this I won't need to put any more on it, and then I'll just oil it every couple of months again. Right, so now we'll grab one of these lovely lint-free cloths from Chestnut Products. I do like using these on the lathe, but they're also really good for giving a little bit of a polish. And it just gets off any excess oil. So I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on the bottom. Just a small bit. And I know in theory it's probably better to oil one side, let it dry and all that, but it doesn't matter too much. Thank you very much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. This is a really fun project to make. Definitely challenging at times, especially when I didn't have the stop block correct on the miter saw, but apart from that it was a really fun project. Bit of a challenge, but something that I think has inspired me to make some more chopping boards, but maybe some more patterned ones, some more difficult ones, and just challenge myself a bit more. But yeah, really happy with the overall outcome. I'll put a couple of photos up on the side now of what it looked like when I was using it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching.